So hi everybody. Right away I wanted to apologize for this video not being able to be put up before this moment. I've been having a lot of technical difficulties. I'm actually recording the video again, but I just wanted to create a brief video lecture to kind of explain some of the content that you'll read about in chapter 3, and this will hopefully give you the context you need to be able to complete the House of Toulmin assignment for next week. So just as a brief review, we know that a thesis is made up of two parts. First is your claim, the main thing that you're trying to argue for, and then reasons that help to back up the claim or help to support it. We've talked about this in class so far. All your editorials have claims and reasons. They might not be explicitly stated like they are in academic papers, but they are still there. I'm going to talk more about why it's very, very important that we analyze rhetoric, that we analyze the thesis itself in order to understand if the piece of rhetoric was effective. First off, though, I do want to give you a brief overview of the rhetorical appeals. We're going to be focusing on the first part of logos today, and I'll explain what I mean by that, but we need to know that there are 3 main rhetorical appeals. We're going to talk more about pathos and ethos next week. However, I want to just kind of introduce you to them. Logos is the inherent rationality or logic of the message. So it's making sure that the thesis is consistent and clear, that it considers its underlying assumptions, so it's not assuming anything that the audience wouldn't assume, and it, in addition to that logic of the message, it also is about evidence. How well are those reasons supported by statistics, personal experience, testimony, library research? So that's logos. Pathos deals with more, it's focused, it's audience-based. So we know that we're not robots when we make our argument that we are talking to human beings. So this is all about the emotional appeal, or how we can emotionally make sure our readers are invested. So that is pathos. And ethos, it's called the ethical appeal, and I don't want you to get tripped up over that word. Essentially, it's credibility. So this is more focused on the writer, the creator of the content or the argument. What can you do to present yourself as being a more credible writer or person that is giving the argument? So we're going to focus on that, again, this top part of logos right now, not the evidence part, but just the inherent logic of a thesis statement. And this all has to do with this idea of assumptions. I've already kind of introduced this concept to you, but anytime we make any sort of argument, we assume all kinds of things about the world. That's okay. The tricky part, though, is that they're not often stated, so we tend to not even realize we're doing it. But if you're crafting an argument, and certainly later on when you write your big paper, you're going to be I'm going to make you aware of what your underlying assumptions are when you have a thesis or a claim and reasons. So I'm going to give you an example because it's kind of hard to explain. But you notice this example is right from the book. And if I had the thesis statement, let's say I was reading my editorial and I knew that this was pretty much my editorial's thesis statement. The public should not support marine parks and swim with dolphin programs because these programs separate dolphins from their natural habitats. There is an assumption there, and if you look at the because part, you can ask yourself, am I assuming it's good or bad that dolphins are separated from their natural habitat? The assumption is that dolphins shouldn't be, or it's wrong to separate them from their natural habitats and social groups. That is fine if you're talking to animal rights activists, but what if you made this argument to the CEO of SeaWorld? They may have different underlying assumptions about the captivity of dolphins. So that's kind of how we figure out what the underlying assumption is. So if you go into this activity, it's from the book, but this asks you to kind of guess at a few more. It's kind of like doing a little bit of math, like undoing the words a little bit. So in this example, they have rabbits make good pets because they are gentle. The assumption obviously is that gentle animals make good pets. Being gentle, gentility is a good thing, a good characteristic to have in a pet. Fine if you're talking to, say, people who love furry dogs or hamsters, but what if you're talking to a reptile enthusiast or someone who really likes snakes? You see how this argument may fall apart depending on who you're making the argument to. There are a few more that you might want to work through on your own. and to see if you can get in the habit of figuring out what the underlying assumptions are of thesis statements. Just as a checkpoint, remember that claims are supported with reasons. When we have that because clause, we attach it to the claim, and which I don't get caught up in this language of this idea of the infimum. The concept behind it is simply that when we have a thesis, we have underlying assumptions. An audience is there to supply those underlying assumptions and hopefully agree with them so the argument can move more forward. If the audience doesn't agree with the underlying assumptions, let's go back to, like, say, we're making that dolphin argument to the CEO of SeaWorld, then we need to outrightly state what our underlying assumptions are. So I'm going to show you now how to do the house and pretty much give you this example of, I'm going to give you a fake example to show how you're going to do it for your editorial. Let me just open up Word real fast. And recent. Okay. Hold on just a sec. I'm going to pause the recording real fast. Okay, so I went ahead and did this sample to show you how I kind of want it to happen. The house is simply a metaphor for understanding Toulmin logic. You don't really need to know a lot about the terminology of Toulmin, but all Toulmin logic is the stuff I'm already talking about with underlying assumptions and making sure that we know what we're assuming when we have arguments, and we know what an author is assuming when we analyze the editorials. So let's say that in my editorial, I was able to figure out that their main argument, their main point they were trying to make is that all high school students should be required to take 4 years of foreign language. Now, of course, it's an editorial, so it's not likely to be explicit in its thesis statement. But after reading over the argument and the article a few times, I was able to pretty much figure out that these are the 3 main reasons. They talk about all 3 throughout the piece. Let's say that the reasons they give are that more colleges are requiring 4 years for entry into college anyway. There's definitely a point about students score higher on tests if they have 4 years of foreign language, and it's important to be like a productive global citizen. The reason it's in a house is because I'd like you to think of the claim as like a roof of a house. Roofs are important, they help shelter us from storms, but they cannot exist without walls. So the reasons act as the walls. They help support the claim, support the ultimate point you're trying to make in your argument. Now, in addition to the walls, though, we need foundation, we need ground. And in Toulmin, we call this grounds, but really all it means is evidence. And I just we can't write it on this one line, so I kind of bump it over here. But what I want you to try to do for the house is pick out a few pieces of evidence you think your author uses to support the reasons. Now, you don't have to list every single piece of evidence they use. We haven't really even started talking about what kinds of evidence even exist yet. But if you notice, like, say there are stats showing how many schools across the nation are now requiring 4 years of foreign language, that's a piece of evidence that helps support this first reason here. So just a couple bullet points at least, kind of trying to see more if you can match up what evidence they're using to which reason they're talking about. Finally, the last thing I want you to do for this house is do the work and look for the things that are not there. So in this metaphor with our house, we have a basement. If you consider a basement of a house, let's say it's Nebraska, we all have basements in our house, but we have people over and we're entertaining. The basement's there. Whether or not we choose to show them our basement is up to us, okay? That's how I need you to think of it. In your editorials, no one's showing you the basement. And none of the editorials actually outrightly state what the underlying assumptions are. Most of the time in arguments, they aren't stated. They're underlying, which means that, they're unspoken. However, I want you to try to go back to that kind of the rabbit example and the dolphin example to try to figure out in your own editorial what the underlying assumptions are. And this is all on you because the author isn't going to say them outright, so you have to figure them out. So let me walk you through what I came up with. If I read my editorial and I know that their first reason was all high school students should be required to take 4 years of foreign language because more colleges are requiring it, they're assuming something about college, that students should go to college, that college is a good thing. They don't outrightly say that in the editorial, but I know that that's what they're actually assuming. So I would list that, and I would actually probably draw an arrow from this first reason down to this first underlying assumption, because those two match. And then you try to work through the rest of them. Let's say another reason students score higher on tests. You're assuming that high test scores are good or an adequate indicator of intelligence. So that would be the second one. And then, of course, it's important to be a productive global citizen. And if you think about it, they're assuming that globalization, being knowledgeable and being worldly, is a good thing. And that's kind of what goes in this third point. So those are the underlying assumptions. You kind of have to work them out for yourself. So that's pretty much it. That's Toulmin logic. I know that it's a little abstract, and I am happy to walk you through or answer any questions you guys have. The questions so far have been great, and I've been trying to answer them quickly. But if you have questions or concerns, you're not bothering me, just send me a message, and I will try to get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks, guys.